Well, for more analysis, we're joined by Dr. Doug Davis, Professor of International Relations. Good afternoon to you, sir.
Good afternoon. Thank you for letting me be here.
Thank you so much for being with us. And Dr. Davis, let me ask you here, could you your perspective on the historical basis for the United States' strong support for Israel and how it aligns with the American foreign policy objectives?
Thank you very much. And the relationship between the U.S. and Israel has gone through multiple phases, but the way that we see it now and the way that we understand it back to the Johnson administration. We have to remember in the early days, after the Cold War ended, the United States and the Soviet Union were the first states to jointly recognize Israel. But we didn't have close relations because during the Cold War, the United States was fighting the anti-communist coalition. And so we really didn't know what to do with Israel. We had a more of a standoffish relationship. And if you look at 1956, the Suez Crisis, for example, the U.S. opposed Israel. And the United States we forced the U.K. to pull out under Anthony Eden. And then we also kind of cornered the French. So the French backed off. And so but the relationship fundamentally changes following the 1967 war, and we see this during the Johnson administration, and that's when the United States really took a clear position to favor Israel. The reason it did that was during the Cold War, and remember the parties that were opposing Israel were joined to the communists. They were being armed by Russia. And so to balance this, of course, the United States needed to defend the democratic states within the region. And Israel was always going to be a state that met that criteria. And also, if you look at it was a perfect relationship in a way because Israel has always depended on great powers for support. And the United States was a great power that could, in fact, provide support. So Israel was searching for someone that could protect it. And the United States was looking for another partner in the region that could coincide with this agenda. And you have to remember that at this time, there was a very close affinity between the Israelis and the United States. And the Americans, there was no comparison. If you look at the internal dynamics and we look at the education, for example, if you go back and look at the university system, there wasn't a degree in American studies offered any until recently. But within the Israeli
Mr. Davis,
yes.
Mr. Davis, let me hear. I'm just quoting some of the different presidents' speeches, which were all. These words were reiterated in all their speeches: the unequivocal support to Israel, the solid and unbreakable relations with Israel. So it was reiterated in all the speeches by all the presidents that we've seen in the United States. That theme has never changed. So it's not according to administrations or different administrations, as you say, respectively here.
Okay. No, respectively, I think you're wrong. If you look at Eisenhower, for example, that quote would not have been said during his administration. It's a much more recent phenomenon, and it does go back from 1960s to the present. So basically, everyone who's now in the region would be a part of the second phase and the third phase. But you're right, if we look at contemporary, correct. There is an unbreakable bond between the United States and Israel that is very clearly felt, and it's very profound in both parties. As I said, we are interested in a new phase because if we look at the Democratic Party, it's divided. There is a large part of the Democrats that, in fact, favor the Palestinians. And so this creates a very difficult dynamic for Democratic politicians to navigate because they can't alienate either their Jewish supporters nor their Arab supporters. And so it makes it very difficult for them to have any kind of policy that would be decisive in the region. And if you look at, for example, Biden's policy and his ineffectiveness, which really, unfortunately, he has been pretty ineffective when it comes to ending conflict within the Middle East and broadly within the world. Part of that is because he is curtailed by these two different positions in his own party that he cannot alienate. So I think in your objection, it's noted, but I think it's historically not true. There were the early presidents were more ambiguous. Now Truman was for Israel, Eisenhower was not, Kennedy was mixed, and there is a fundamental change going from Johnson to the present. So if you talk about Lyndon Johnson all the way to contemporary to today, you're right. But that said, the United States is in a very difficult moment with the voters on the left because the Democratic Party now is different than it was in the past 30 years.
If I'm not right, then what we've seen so far, it's not about me, right or wrong, but these were quotes. I'm quoting just presidents. I'm just reporting the
Sure,
incidents,
sure.
And if there were differences in any of the administrations, is Eisenhower or Mr. Johnson or whatsoever, then from your point of view, how do you evaluate the U.S. financial and military aid to Israel all the time on the broader Middle East, particularly with regard to the stability of the whole region?
Well, that is a great question, and I think that the United States does have a long-term relationship with Israel, and because part of it is of October 7th. If we look at the Israeli populations, the families that were celebrating the music festival, the people that were at home that were systematically eliminated. It was planned and carried out by the Palestinians in Gaza. That's something that resonates with all Americans. All Americans want. There is a vulnerability. Israel does in fact need the assistance of other powers to defend it because of it's obviously in a very difficult region. And that said, there is animosity people in the regions and the states that surround it, in particular with terrorists and other groups that have set forward and wish to target and eliminate Israel. So it's a tough position, but whenever we see a state like that, that's a democracy, and they cry for help with other democracies, they're going to be defended. And the fact that Israel has this great relationship does, in fact, resonate with the greater United States approach to defending democracies, as well as the specific vulnerabilities.
And what kind of democracy are we seeing here in the Palestinian occupied territories, or in Lebanon, or in any of the countries that are being struck by Israel? And what kind of democracy are we speaking about when we have no objection at all from the congressional members, or from any of the members in the administration, or any opponents to any of the reactions towards those decisions?
Well, that's a great question. What kind of democracy is present? And if we look at under the Palestinian Authority, there were a lot of problems and issues with democracy. And looking at the Lebanese state, the confessional democracy, the most important difficulty is that systems of government were not able to gain adequate. They weren't able to convince other democracies that they were in fact modern, to actually represent and act for the interests of the populations at large. And there's competitive, free, and fair elections. So just because you have elections and you have the appearance of democracy doesn't mean you have democracy. And there is a certain criteria within democratic states that need to be met before states can in fact be part of that system. And if you want to think about this, there is a very simple illustration. look at the structures that states have to go through before they join NATO. For example, we look at all of the institutional changes that need to take place within Eastern Europe, which took a long time for those states to be able to make and institute those changes so that they could, in fact, gain membership within NATO. But that's all part of the Partnership for Peace program. Uh, there is no similar thing within the governments in the Arab world. Uh, so
Uh, I think this is from your own perspective, right? This is from your or the criteria put
sure,
by your side, right? Now, let me here take it from our side, and given the consistent U.S. support for Israel, what do you think are the barriers to an unbiased American role in the peace negotiations?
well, honestly, I think the biggest difficulty is our right now we're in a presidential election, and the fact that Biden doc that he will be leaving office shortly. Had he stayed in office and had he won for re-election, he would have a lot more authority and a lot more agency within the region at large. And the really unfortunate thing for me is that the United States has been much less of a protagonist, that we have not been able to effectively work to end the conflict in either region or bring about a situation that would stabilize it. And so part of that is because of the division, in particular within the Democratic Party of the United States, that really binds the United States. So we can't come out too much in favor of Israel or too much in favor of the Palestinians or the Lebanese, because that would alienate the other side of the party and would have huge effects on the candidacy of Harris going forward in the presidential election. So I think that is a tremendous barrier and a difficulty that the United States faces. Whenever we go to change an administration and the president is a lame duck, we almost have to wait till the next president comes to office to actually deal with this, which means that until January 20th, the United States will in fact have less to mitigate and stand in and settle this disputes. So that's a part of the structure of our system.
Right. So until January 20th, with the new administration, how does the American towards the U.S. in the Middle East, especially among populations sympathetic to the Palestinians and the Lebanese rights?
Well, that's a great question. I really think it depends on who wins the election in November. So who wins next Tuesday's presidential election? Because that will, I think that the candidate that wins will have to have a policy. So I'm sure both candidates are in fact putting forth a policy towards the Middle East. And one thing you notice that Harris has not put forward a Middle Eastern plan yet, because it's something that is very difficult and contentious and can, as I said, cause divisions. But that is something that the candidates will in fact have to do once they're elected, because right now they're trying to gain a coalition. But after they're elected, they have to create legitimacy for themselves as leaders and for the United States. So they will have to address this. And the one thing that the United States will have going forward is a very clear idea of who that leader will be in January. And so if it's Trump or if it's Harris, either candidate will in fact spend a substantial amount of the time after they win the election to create a policy that they believe in, that will bring about stability and peace within the region. And you have to understand that is the American goal. I mean, the war benefits no one. Right now, the division, I believe, hurts, and particularly the establishment. We're in office now. Electorally, they're I think very much hurt. So we will see that when the election is done, the candidate that wins will in fact have to make an appeal to everyone in the Middle East.
Now,
a legitimate plan.
yes. But when the new administration is in office, or any new administration, do you think they will stop using the veto power? And how do you view the implication of the U.S. veto power in the UN Security Council would help in shielding Israel from would help in to shield Israel rather from the
I think the U.S. will continue to use its veto power, and what that really does is it means that that when there's a position that comes up that involves Israel, if Israel is not involved in looking at it to make sure that it meets its security interests, of that, and I imagine that the administration would throw that out. But we have to understand that we are at a generational point in the United States, and we see a lot of the young voters and the supporters of the Democratic Party who are now moving away from Israel, and that will have long-term consequences within the region. I don't know what they are. Nobody knows that, but the United States is at a generational change, and so it's something that has to be watched very closely. But we're at a very interesting moment in American history. And, if the Democratic Party now is so divided in its approach to the Arab and Israeli issue, indicate the United States and make it a little bit more difficult for us to have policies that will withstand a change in partisan administration. So when we switch from Democrats to Republicans or Republicans to Democrats, we may see major changes in our foreign policy. And if that's the case, that's not healthy for our country, and I think it's not healthy for the world. And so the weakness is that the United States needs a clear, coherent policy position that will endure both political parties, that will in fact work to bring stability to the region. And that's something that requires a lot of work on our part.
Well, all hopeful, Mr. Davis, and that was Dr. J. Doc Davis, a professor of international relations. We thank you so much for your insights here.